Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Meetup. I'm your host, Suzanne Estrella, the Commonwealth Victim Advocate. This is a place for thoughtful reflection and honest conversation. I do need to let you know that there is no expectation of privacy. This is being streamed through Facebook. It's going to be uploaded at a later time to our YouTube channel so that people can watch at their convenience. We are monitoring the chat box, so if you have questions or comments throughout the evening, please type those in and we'll be sure to address those throughout the program. Tonight, I'm joined with a group of women from two different organizations, Straight Ahead and CADV. We're going to be talking about dual victims, what that term actually means, and how we make space to address the concerns of all members of our community. So welcome, ladies. I'm going to give each person an opportunity to just start off by introducing yourself. Tell us which organization you work with, and then we'll go from there. Let's see, we'll start with Roxanne.
Let me unmute myself. Okay. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you so much for giving this opportunity to talk to everyone about the work that we're doing. My name is Roxanne Harrell. I am the campaign director for an organization called Straight Ahead, and mainly the work that Straight Ahead has been doing. And the campaign I've been directing is a campaign to end life without parole in Pennsylvania, in addition to winning geriatric and medical parole for lifers in prison, and that's the work that we're doing. But with that, we also do a lot of engagement with survivors and victims, and I'm gonna, allow Rakia to introduce herself and the work that she does.
All right, thank you. Rakia, we'll go next to you.
How you doing? Again, I echo Roxanne in saying thank you for giving us the space to come and have this conversation. My name is Rakia Lindsay. I'm the Survivor Justice Advocate with Straight Ahead. So my work is to build and to, work with our network of survivors in order to really understand what it is that survivors are needing, how we feel. I guess I should also share, I am a dual survivor myself. And so understanding that we as survivors are not a monolith. And so the work that I do is to kind of uphold the stories that are, or the narratives that we come across when we do deal with people who have lost loved ones to violence, because the stories range, right? And what people feel as though they need in terms of healing and safety overall are not all one and the same. And so my work is to build with, survivors and to just tell our stories and share our truths. And then with that, I'll pass it to Christina.
Great, thank you. Christina?
Hi, Suzanne. Thank you for having us on this platform to speak on a topic that I feel is very, very important. I am a dual survivor. I'm a person that's been impacted by being a victim of a crime and then also having a loved one that's incarcerated. So I've seen it on different spectrums, and I'm a big advocate for second chances.
Great, thank you so much. Now, before we get in too far, because the term was very new to me, I think when I first started speaking with you all. So I'm going to ask you, and each of you can kind of speak to it in the way that you would like to, but we'll go ahead and start with you, Christina, and tell us what the term dual victim, or now you say dual survivor, what does the term actually mean to you, and how are you using that term in your work?
Well, the term for me is somebody who's been impacted on both spectrums. I'm not just a person that has been just a victim. I've had loved ones that have, I've been affected by their loss. And then also I've had family members, I've had friends that have been incarcerated, and I'm fighting for them to come home. And, just to kind of go in a little bit deeper, I was impacted at the age of 7, where I had my stepfather who was murdered. 2 people were convicted at the time. And a few months later, my father was murdered with my uncle, and that was a double homicide, and nobody was ever convicted in that. that situation. And then by the time that I was about 9 years old, I had a cousin that was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 16. And, he was still a teenager. And by the
Wow.
time I reached 16, I had another loved one that was sentenced to a life sentence at the age of 18. So for me, I've been impacted in various ways because I know what it feels like to deal with that grief and go through the process of that. And then also having someone that is not present because they are incarcerated. And that kind of feels like you're also losing someone that's in your life. Um, and just to speak on the fact too, with my stepfather, with his with the conviction that was in that case, someone was coming home during the youth resentencing. So I also had to go through the process of going back to court and just stating how that impacted me and my family as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Rakia, tell us about that, what that term means to you.
I think Christina did an excellent job of, describing dual survivor. I would like to go into like the victim. You kind of like pointed out that, we said dual survivor and not victim, and a little background just in that we like to move victims from a place of victimhood and vulnerability into that place of strength and power. And so when you think about a victim, you think about, oftentimes the harm done, but survivors are conquerors, right? And so we kind of use the term survivor instead of victim to give people back their power. And then as far as the history of the term dual survivor, Christina, like I said, Christina did an excellent job explaining that a dual survivor is someone who does understand the weight of loss on two different spectrums, right? Understanding what it feels to lose someone to harm, and then at the same time deal with the void of losing a person to death by incarceration, right? That life without the possibility of parole. But there is a history to where this term actually came from, as it relates to CADB, Straight Ahead, and ALC. And that was a few years back. There was a lot of work done with CADB and ALC to get a certain bill heard in committee. And this bill would have provided the opportunity for people, a lot of people currently serving life without the possibility of parole sentences to have, those sentences looked at and been given that eligibility. But at that time, the OVA who was in office at the time, I believe her name was Jennifer Storm, she had the bill blocked on the day that it was supposed to be heard in committee. Now, these people in CADB and ALC had done the work to have this, bill heard, and it was blocked that day under the guise of the story that this was what was in victims' interest. And the term, came out when one of the CADB members who was present said, but we're victims too. And that is the story of where we realize, right, like there is more than one type of survivor. There is more than one type of person who experiences harm. And although, some survivors have a stance when it comes to what they would like to see happen to the harm causers, there is another story for what other survivors want. And so just understanding that survivorship or victimhood, whatever, however people, classify the term, it is, a broad scale. And so we can't just overlook the thoughts and feelings and the desires of one set of survivors or victims, because it doesn't fit the narrative that, we are pushing for. So that's the history.
Okay, thank you for that. Roxanne, you got anything you want to add to that? the term?
Yeah, so not too much because I think both of them did a really great job explaining. I would like to add like the reason that we are engaged in this work is because I think there's like this false idea that there's this, great separation between people who cause harm and people who are harmed, but like oftentimes like those people are living in the same communities, their family, their neighbors, and sometimes they're the same people, right? And so I think, you know, traditionally, like when we think of like victims and like how like victims narratives have been used like in the criminal justice like realm, it has been to advocate for harsher sentencing and harsher punishment. But you know, when you're coming from some of the most impacted communities, like those people are your neighbors and your friends, and like there's just like a completely different perspective of like and like experience, and like a lot of those stories don't get uplifted of like, you know, people like Christina and people like Rakia who are living in these neighborhoods, you know, who have experienced things on both sides like multiple times, like you know, there I feel like both of them have multiple stories that they can point to of like how they've experienced loss, you know, in both ways. And but at the same time, like we don't often hear about these stories like, you know, in the mainstream, and like when we're talking about like criminal justice reform, and this is what we're trying to do with this work, is uplifting those voices and those stories so that all victims are heard and all victims like perspectives are, you know, also given weight when we're, you know, making these decisions, and like, and what's more, like making decisions that impact like the neighborhoods that they live in the most, right? And so that's, I just want to say that.
Right, I appreciate that. So, not to like try to minimize anything that was said, but in case, you know, like it comes up and people are asking, is it safe to say that when we are talking about a dual victim or a dual survivor, we're talking about a person who has been impacted by crime and also has a significant interest in perhaps a person who is incarcerated?
I would say not even a significant person. I would say like a loved one. I mean,
A
because
loved
it could
one.
be mothers, it could be fathers, sons, sisters. And I also want to point one thing out that we fail to kind of speak on is the fact that a lot of people that have been incarcerated have also been victims prior to being incarcerated.
Mhm. Right, I agree. So, yeah, that would be like almost like a different type of dual victim. So it's, the term itself is not just limited then to that one, because we could be talking about, someone who was like a domestic violence victim who was now incarcerated for something else. Okay,
Exactly.
all right. Okay, I just want to make sure that, we kind of put some clarity around that so people can understand like where the conversation is coming from. I did also wanted to point out something that I think Roxanne, you mentioned about how connected we all are. And that's why I feel like this conversation is so important, because the majority of people who are incarcerated are coming back to communities and kind of being able to speak into what that comeback is going to look like, so that we all can be a part of good neighboring, creating safer, caring communities. I like to say where justice thrives. It's so important that there is never a point, I feel like if the person is still breathing, then there's opportunity for change. And that we always want to make sure that we recognize that nobody wants to be remembered for perhaps maybe the worst thing they did on what was the worst day of their life. Like how do we get around that to make sure that we're speaking positively into crime prevention, into restorative justice, and building that resiliency. And I think that is something that we all can be a part of. Now, of course, what we hear on the other end of the spectrum is that people can sometimes feel like we're saying that somehow this takes away from accountability. And I don't believe that that has to be the case, but what do you all think about that? Or what is your response to that when you hear people say that what you're suggesting or what you're asking for takes away from the fact that a person who has caused an offense needs to be accountable for what they've done?
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
yeah, I think there are multiple ways people can be accountable, but that being said, we're not asking for there to be no consequences for harm, right? What we're asking for is that, after people have served their time, and we're talking about like decades in prison at this point, right? Like decades, that the people who have done the work and have changed have an opportunity to be heard for parole, right? To have a parole hearing, which doesn't guarantee release, by the way.
Mhm.
It's a very long process to be, granted parole in itself. But people who are serving life sentences right now in Pennsylvania don't even have that opportunity. And there are many people, like hundreds of people, like even thousands of people in PA prisons right now who have done the work, who are actually doing the work to mentor young people coming in so they don't make the same mistakes when they go back out, right? And like who don't really have currently the hope of being released, but are doing that work anyways. What we're asking for is for those men and women to come back out in our communities so that they can do that work, when they get out. And many of them do. Like we have this case study with like the juvenile lifers, like we had hundreds of juvenile lifers that were released. Of those, like many of them are like active and engaged in their communities, like, mentoring people, doing the work. And like also like of the, like almost 200, like only two of them went back and for nonviolent, offenses, right? And so, what we're talking about is like a real success story and like people who can really make an impact in their communities, but are in prison. And so they can't. And so like accountability, I think can look in various ways. And I think accountability can continue even after you're released, by going out in your community and like trying to, make up for that harm that you did. I think, prison in itself is not really accountability because it's very passive, right? I think accountability has to be active. And so, yeah, so that's, I think, accountability is something that can continue even after people are released as well.
All right. Did anybody else want to add anything to that?
I actually did.
Okay.
I feel like in agreement with what Roxanne is saying, accountability is something that is felt, not forced. And although people should, when people do wrong, people should atone for their actions, right? But Roxanne kind of spoke to prisons almost incapability of making that happen, because when someone goes to prison, they are removed from society. They are removed from actually having to face the harm that they caused. And there is no opportunity for them to actually make amends for what it is that they've done, right? Like oftentimes prison people who are incarcerated are barred from reaching out to the family to which they have caused harm to. I know there is the letter bank that exists, but from what I understand, if families don't go seeking those letters, that exchange of emotions or remorse is never actually felt. And so, and understanding it with respect to the, reality, right? That if someone causes harm, they should be accountable to their action, but that is a personal thing. And someone who does not choose to look at what they've done is not going to be accountable. And so I feel like even in the idea of sending people to prison, it doesn't necessarily say that someone will be accountable, but in reverse, after someone has done their time, or in some other, I heard you speak to restorative justice, right, some other form of way, then exposed to their community, taken, acknowledged what they've done, and like Roxanne said, are willing to be active and actually making amends for the harm that they've caused. That's where the accountability happens. And it's active. It's something that you have to invest your time, invest your heart, invest your work in. So it's not something that happens just because we send someone to jail. That is not the same thing as accountability. It's a personal process that the harm causer has to go through.
Can I add to what both Roxanne and Rakia mentioned? I mean, I agree with them, but I also think that in accountability, like there has to be tools set in place for accountability with the DOC as well, like to have like some type of assessment And sometimes people are moved and shifted around and so disconnected, and for me, being on the opposite side of everything and going to court and seeing someone that I never seen before at all, I can't even know what type of, things that he did until I received a letter talking about how he was impacting the community within the facility that he was in. And there's just a disconnect where I also feel like there needs to be some type of healing also put in place for victims as well, because a lot of times when people are going back up for these paroles, they have the victims come in and, kind of give a testimonial, but these individuals already have been convicted. And I can't say, what he's changed or the progress that he made during his time being in prison. That's not my place. I feel like if they're going to have victims be a part of that, there should be measures put in place also that can help those individuals kind of find some type of healing, because it is kind of hard when you have to process all of that all over again, and it leaves people upset if they're not in a place where they've already been able to cope with it. And secondly, too, we have to also think about the fact that we have a lot of people that are in prison, and some of them have been given harsh sentences because it's not necessarily to say that they murdered someone, but they could have been an accomplice. And because in the state of Pennsylvania, you also get a life without parole sentence in those type of situations. So, it's accountability in different forms, but I also think that it's accountability and the people that are in higher powers to kind of have different tools available, not just through the DLC or the OVA, but just even within, the community and leadership with legislation.
Mhm. Very interesting. Now, tell me about CADB. Tell us about that organization, and then after that, I'll ask you guys to tell me about Straight Ahead. But let's start with CADB. Tell us about that organization.
Well, CABI is an organization that was established as the Coalition Against Death by Incarceration. And with the coalition, there's a lot of members, there's a lot of families that have people that are currently incarcerated serving a death sentence, basically. They're fighting to bring people home. They're talking to legislators. They're also doing things within the community to get more people proactively involved that have been impacted. I think that part of the community that we live in, a lot of people don't really speak up as much as they should. And sometimes that's just the culture. So when we talk about certain victims having a voice, I don't know what color they are. I don't know if they look like me. I don't know if they have the same story as me or the stories that I'm listening to within my community. But I know that, CABI is a coalition that's working towards bringing people home. And, something that I realized even getting involved, because I'm fighting for someone to come home, and my cousin came home during the youth resentencing as well. But, being in a place where you're in a courtroom and you're seeing two families from the same community so disconnected, and it's such an awkward feeling because, you know, they feel for us. I felt for them, although not a lot of people have that type of empathy or even compassion to feel that way. But it's hard to be in those spaces knowing that they want their family member home. We want our family member to be, present as well. And because we don't have those opportunities, it leaves the whole community completely disconnected. And that's why I said there needs to be resources also in place, because they bring you into these settings and it's already awkward, and they don't really allow like room to heal or to even have some type of closure beforehand. Because I feel like if I would have had an opportunity to know what this man was doing or how he was progressing, because when you're incarcerated, it's very hard unless you really apply yourself and you work as hard as possible to be put in those programs, to be seen, honestly. Because a lot of times they're not even in our neighborhoods, but they're giving to charities and they're doing things within the neighborhood, but a lot of people don't even know that those things are happening. I know right now one of the facilities they were given to the OVA, they wanted to donate, you know, but how do they have that opportunity to also let other victims know that they are apologetic?
Mhm. Point. Point. And then, you know, like you all mentioned early on, the spectrum of survivor or victim is so broad that we, and I think it's important that we acknowledge for, you know, those who have lost loved ones to homicide, that, you know, there's no sufficient punishment or anything, because that can't be replaced. We can't bring that person back, and there's nothing that's really gonna to make that right. So I just want to make sure that we acknowledge that, because that is a space where so many people sit, where and find this type of conversation to be so uncomfortable, because we just cannot give them back what they lost. So I do want to honor that and recognize that. But I do hear what you're saying as well, Christina, about finding more opportunities for people who feel like they're ready and at that place where they would like to move forward. I think that, yeah, that's something that we really need to be involved with, or finding ways that we can help people to move past that hurt, and to figure out what does resilience look like for them, and what does moving forward really mean for them, and providing more opportunities. Like, we do a homicide support group. We have another support group. We have a social worker who's actually doing some things within one of the facilities for females that are incarcerated. So finding more resources and ways like that, where we can really engage with people and helping them to be empowered to move forward, that is so vitally important. Before we get too far ahead, Roxanne, tell us about Straight Ahead, that organization.
Yeah, so Straight Ahead is actually the 501c4 arm, or like the legislative arm of Abolitionist Law Center. And really, Straight Ahead was, started with the intention of, like running a legislative campaign to end life without parole in the state. And like, this was the reason that we were created. Like, for people who don't know, Pennsylvania has some of the strictest sentencing laws when it comes to life without parole sentences. And it's created this really big ballooning of our, geriatric population inside Pennsylvania prisons. And without any like recourse, for people to be released, like our commutations, have the way that we grant commutations, like in the past, it used to be used, as like a valve for a release valve for parole. Like, there were hundreds of people who were released in commutations per year, like in the 70s, and the prison population was a lot less then. But in the 90s, that changed when they went to like a unanimous approval on the commutations board. And now, I think between like, depending on the year and who the governor is, like, I think, it's very little that gets released through commutations. It's very difficult. And so what we really do need is like some kind of release valve for people who have rehabilitated themselves, to just have an opportunity to be heard. Because right now, they've served their time, like they've done the work, and like, they're also like one of the safest groups of people to release like into the population. And so that's kind of like the intention, like Straight Ahead was started for, to advocate for these people, so that they can have an opportunity to come home, and to add capacity to groups like CADB, which is like a group of, like Christina said, like family members, impacted people, volunteers. And so like Straight Ahead has paid staff that can like help support that work, and do a lot of lobbying visits, do, organizing around the state, like develop like communications and videos and content and things like that. And so that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years.
And then, are both the groups Pennsylvania groups, or are they national groups, or just They're Pennsylvania groups.
Yes, they're statewide Pennsylvania groups. Yes.
Okay, all right, great. Rakia, if you feel comfortable, tell us about how the holiday season impacts you and incarcerated survivors that you know and love.
For me personally, well, the survivorship in it, I actually lost my cousin right around the holidays in 2020. So just with that being the case, that's the holidays have become a little difficult. Um, but as far as the impact on me having an incarcerated loved one, it's a strain. A lot of times during the holidays, like you're busier, right? It's a lot of hustle and bustle. It makes things like missing a phone call that much more terrible because like you're not exactly sure if and when they're gonna be allowed to call back. Like maybe you'll hear from them today, maybe not. And I don't it sometimes finds me in this place where I'm like uneasy and just, it's a void, right? Like this is a time where family is getting together, you're excited and you want to be happy, but there is again just this void, right? The loved ones that are no longer here because they literally physically can't be here, like are no longer with us. And then, not being able to break bread, to share in these moments with someone else who is not here because of force. So yeah, just when things should feel, exciting and happy, it's that little sadness that creeps up and behind you, and that resilient word that you use, you find yourself having to really be just a little bit more resilient in order to push through the pain. So
Thank you for sharing that. How would you like to see Pennsylvania change the narrative regarding incarceration? Like, do you all have specific goals with your organization, or what is it that you're hoping to see? Christina, you want to start? And Roxanne, whoever wants to go
Christina,
first.
you can go ahead.
Well, for me, I think that it's working on these bills and giving people opportunities to go up for parole. I mean, commutation, as we know, it is such a tedious process. And if we look at how many people have been commuted, I mean, it's a very low number. So how do people who have been really working on themselves or who have rehabilitated or didn't kind of stand a chance even before they came into prison, how do we give them an opportunity? And I'm not for everyone coming home. I've never said that, but I think that people who have worked on themselves and people who are also being productive members within these facilities, and we can showcase it, like Roxanne said, by the people who came home, they're doing wonderful things. They're doing things in the community and they're trying to heal these communities as well. So for me, it's talking to our legislators, it's talking to people in leadership positions and letting them know, like, we don't want people to be forgotten either. Because, people being incarcerated is still not stopping the violence that's taking place in Pennsylvania. So, I mean, that's another topic to discuss, but, we're trying to get these bills passed. And I think that by more people being able to hear voices of people that look familiar to them and that have been impacted, maybe it'll give them more of a voice to speak up and say, I need to be a part of that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one thing that we would like to do is, I guess, shift the narrative on how we see like I guess people and see people like more holistically and like, and like where people come from and like what actually does prevent crime. I think we would like to shift the narrative from like, because, you know, harsh like punishment doesn't like prevent crime. Like crime is like caused because like communities are poor and lack resources. And like, you know, we would like to fight for those things and shift the narrative and like, you know, actually invest into things that will make our community safer. Cause like at the end of the day, everyone deserves to be safe. Like, you know, violence is a huge problem. Like, you know, and like we don't want to reduce like the harm that is caused. Like these are terrible things, right? But like we got to work together to actually think of solutions that are actually going to prevent them from happening in the first place, right? Um, and like also just to see people from these communities where like are most impacted more holistically, because like it's really complex. Like this is a really complex issue, and like, you know, yeah, and it's like what we're doing right now is not working and it's not helping, and we need to do something else. And so um yeah, I think we hope to shift the narrative around that and just like be more open in how we're telling people's stories, and like um yeah, and just getting that out there.
Okay. Do either of the groups, are you doing any work with crime prevention along those lines, or?
Well, I would say a little, I think that we all are. I mean, everybody is talking to people within the community. I know that I'm also in different groups where sometimes I'm supporting mothers who have lost their children to gun violence. And then also, I work in a community where, I'm a manager of a training program, and I have a lot of people that are coming in that were, coming out of the system. And as Roxanne was stating, if they're making good money and they're doing something productive, of course, people will stay, away from the streets. We got to consider it's a lot of things that need to be placed into these communities, a lot more resources, because there's a lack of education, there's a lack of income, there's a lot of mental health going on. So, if there are more resources to help people, of course, you're gonna sprout different type of flowers.
Hmm.
Yeah. To piggyback kind of, as far as Straight Ahead is concerned, we've been having events called Community Needs Assessment, where we are actually, reaching out to different victims groups and survivors and having conversations about what the healing journey has been like so far. Getting an understanding about what resources people feel like are necessary for that holistic healing. And one of the big things that is coming from these conversations that we're having is that survivors are looking for prevention, right? And so just in having these conversations and really building an understanding of what that prevention looks like, right? What it means for people to live in a safe community. Because again, prevention prevents, the need for prosecution. And that's, survivors want to live in a society where we're not constantly re-triggered. And even if, someone was apprehended based on what happened to me, right? Hearing gunshots outside of my window just, takes me back to that loss, right? And so um having these conversations, right, and giving people, I really think a big part of, the crime prevention is the advocacy and the empowerment that Christina spoke about, right? Like really giving people the tools to understand that their voice is important. And it's almost like each one teach one, right? Like you have one conversation with one community member who then goes out into the community and tells their story, right? And even some of the people, the organizations that we do work with, and some of the returning citizens, right? They are dedicating their lives to then come home and have been outreaching to young people and trying to give them opportunities and kind of steer them away from, some of the horrible decisions that they might have made in order to, number one, create those safer communities, but really fight for the future of someone else who they don't want to see go down those same paths. So that's some of what we're doing as far as crime prevention.
Awesome. Roxanne, you want to tell us about what bills are you all you want to talk about some of the bills that you're hoping to see move in 23?
2023, yeah. So we are, so there's two, I think, main types of bills. So like I mentioned, medical and geriatric parole, and the bills that have been currently introduced, which will have to be reintroduced in the new session, might look a bit different. But this would be for people who are at least 55 years of age and who have served at least 25 years or half their sentence, for like an aging out bill. And then for like the medical portion of that, it would be for people who have like chronic medical conditions, that would be, eligible as well. And then like there's a parole for lifers bill that has been introduced in the Senate as well. That would create parole eligibility for people who, for first degree murder, if they've served at least 35 years, and then for second degree, if it's 25 years. But again, these have to be reintroduced, I think. And like what ultimately gets passed will probably look very different. And I also don't know like what will be introduced next year. I think there's several possibilities, to have a bill for maybe like people who go in very young. So like the thing is, many people who commit very violent crime are very, very young when they do so. And like, I believe it's like under the age of 23, 70-something%, right? And so that's before, the brain is even fully developed. And so there are several states that have had success around emerging adult bills, where people who are very young and committed their crime can have parole eligibility after a certain amount of time. But again, like this would be after, serving decades in prison, and for people who have shown that they have done the work and to change themselves. So there are several possibilities out there. We feel hopeful for the next session, and we're going to be fighting hard. But we're going to see what happens.
All righty. And then Christina, does CADV have different bills, or are you all supporting the same bills, or?
And we're all supporting the same bills.
Okay, great. So death by incarceration, is that a straight ahead term, or is that a CADV term, or both?
It's a term that I think we all use in the movement, and like it's not owned by anybody, but we use that term because it more accurately reflects the reality of the sentence. So death by incarceration is the same thing as life without parole. But really what you are sentencing somebody to die in prison. And so in movement spaces, we tend to use death by incarceration more often.
And how can community members like find out about the different things that you're offering, or like if somebody, wanted to get involved or to help you out in any way, how will people find out how to connect with you all?
Well, Straight Ahead does have a website that they can always visit. I believe it's straight-ahead.org. We have a mailing list that you can sign up for and get updates. We always have events going around. We have an Instagram where we post like anything that is happening. CADV has monthly meetings and like several committees that people can also be part of. So like if people are interested in getting involved, like I think it would be really easy to, get our information off of the Straight Ahead website. You can probably look, CADV, I believe, has a Facebook page as well that people can look at and contact somebody as well, if they're looking to get involved in that space. There are lots of ways, and we all work together. So,
Great. Tell me, I'll let each of you answer this one. Tell me what one word best describes why you are involved in this space the way that you are. Mm,
So for me, it's the future.
All right,
Can
now
I?
you tell us why.
I was just saying, can I elaborate? So now I spoke earlier to the realization, right, that in both losing people to violence, right, um, like physical, the act of losing someone to violence and then losing someone to incarceration, it leaves voids in a specific kind of community, right? More than others. And so with respect to understanding the losses that are happening in Black and Brown communities at such a rapid pace, right? It's important for me to be able to be a part of work that will see us into a future, right? And if we continue to lose people to violence, to incarceration, then that future just doesn't exist. And so again, it's just really important for me to use whatever energy and power that I have towards the uplift of us as Black and Brown people, and to make sure that we do have a future in this country and beyond, that is full of all the positive and wonderful things, right? That life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that we haven't necessarily had equitable access to, but we do get to change our narrative. And so it's important for me to be a part of their work.
Awesome. Christina?
I think for me, it's change. I mean, prison has been around for so long. People have been impacted in the community for a really long time. And for me, I think that, seeing it from different lenses, there has to be a change within the community and also within the cycle. Like this is like a generational thing that keeps taking place, but nothing has really changed about it. Um, and so for me, it's like I really want to see the community restored. I want to see people coming back to their families. I want to see more unity by that taking place as well. And I also want to see some type of healing also, because I feel like healing is kind of like a key to helping people kind of get over a lot of those emotions that they go through. But if we don't have something in place for that, you can't really have anybody kind of feel like, okay, well, now I'm feeling like this person is accountable or they did any type of change, and it doesn't restore anything. So I think that changing the way that we think, the way that we view things, and the way that we see the things that we're doing, and working closely together, I think that's gonna bring change about within the community and what our mission is.
Awesome. Roxanne?
Yeah, I think for me, and like I think both Ricky and Christina said this a lot in their responses as well, is community, right?
Mm,
And I think we, whether we live in Philadelphia or like in Mill, Pennsylvania, we all belong to a community, and like, the way that we've done things, like historically when it comes to mass incarceration, have left these voids in like these communities, like in places like Philadelphia. And, there are a lot of people that are suffering, and like, I want to be, and it's just like I mentioned this before, like what we're doing right now isn't working. Like maybe we don't have, a clear picture of exactly what the solution is yet, but, we got to do something, because like people are struggling and suffering, and like the loss is just so deep, and like,
mm,
and in like compounded, right? Like it's just
yeah.
loss after loss after loss. And like both these things, like loss of like to homicide, or loss to people inside prison, they're both contributing to that. And like it's just perpetuating the cycle that I think gets worse and worse as time goes on, because like we have those members of our community missing forever, right? And like, and we can't pretend that that doesn't have impact. Like it hasn't had a positive impact. And and so I don't know, I want to be part of the solution to some way restore some kind of balance to our communities in Philadelphia, and to be part of the solution, even if I don't exactly know what that solution is yet. So
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I want to let you guys know that you all are so impressive. And it is very inspiring for me to be able to host this conversation with young Black and Brown women who are in this space doing something so incredibly positive and empowering. I'm so excited. It gives me so much hope to believe that change is possible when I can look and see other generations moving forward and wanting to bring about that positive change. So really, I applaud you and thank you for the work that you're doing. And I'm excited to see how we can continue to collaborate and kind of change that narrative, because I mean, that is one thing that I have said for I don't know how many years. If incarceration was the answer, we'd be at a different place by now. But apparently there has to be something else that's needed to get us where we all, I think, collectively want to be. And like I say that with all the respect and honor I can for the people who I know who have lost things that we cannot repay you. We cannot give it back to you. If we could, we would, but we can't. So what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that I say this too, crime prevention is a victim service. It's like the best victim service that we can have is crime prevention, because what we constantly hear from survivors in all places on the spectrum is that what they want most is that what happens to them never happens to anybody else. And that's crime prevention. So I'm looking for ways that we can really find resources to build into communities and really think about what crime prevention looks like. Like maybe that looks like an after-school softball team sometimes, and not just somebody giving a lesson on why you don't want to go to juvenile hall. So really rethinking that, and ways that we can work together. And when we see those funding announcements, passing that word along, please consider OVA a partner in that. If you have different community organizations who are trying to get funding, let us know so that when we see those announcements come up, we can make sure that that gets out to the communities that are most in need, so that people can start applying for some of this funding that the state does have available. We could try to make sure that we get that spread around a little bit more than maybe what we currently see. I think that would be really important. But I do want to, again, thank you all so much for sharing this time and space with me tonight and bringing some clarity on that term, dual victim. Now we should be saying dual survivor. So I will make sure to make note of that. But thank you all. Thank you for the work that you do. Again, this will go up on our YouTube channel and people will have access to view it. And I'm sure they will at their convenience. So thank you so much. And to all of our viewers and listeners, we look forward to, again, sharing space with you next month on our next Monday night meetup. So thank you all.
thank you, everybody.
Thank
you.
you.